I see us up and running. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the OnyxPathCon Freelancer 101 panel. My name is Crystal Mazur. I'm going to be both moderating and participating in the panel. What we're going to do is today we're going to talk about like what it is to be a freelancer, how to get into freelancing, some of the things that you might need to know as a freelancer starting off, and then maybe some common mistakes and stuff like that that freelancers might make along the way, and what you can do to help support that or fix it or work on it with communication and stuff like that. So I have done, for OnyxPath, I've worked on Chicago by Night. I've worked on Let the Streets Run Red. And I am the developer for No Gods, No Masters for Scion 2E. I have also run games and the booth for conventions for many years with OnyxPath. You've probably run into me if you see me at conventions. So, and I'll let the other panelists introduce themselves. Let's start with Amy, since you are like right next to me.
Hey everyone, I am Amy Wilkins. I'm an artist who's freelanced with OnyxPath and a few other companies as well. But for Onyx, I worked on Chicago by Night and also the Cults of the Blood Gods. So, yeah.
All right, Catie.
Hello, everybody. My name is Catie Griffin, and I have freelanced for OnyxPath and have done things with Dystopia Rising Evolution, been a developer for Helendahl's Guide to Wasteland Beasties, as well as Trouble on the Steel Pier. I've also done some work on Scion projects, as well as Scarred Lands, Cavaliers of Mars, and I think that's it. I might be forgetting something, but it's a pleasure to be here.
All right, Jose.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jose Garcia. I am a freelance writer. I've worked with OnyxPath quite a number of times, mostly with the Chronicles of Darkness and the World of Darkness lines, but most recently with StoryPath games, like they came from Camp Sugar Lake, and they came from Classified, as well as a few other places, like the upcoming new edition of Ren.
All right. So I would also like to invite our watchers to please ask any comments within the Twitch channel. I am actually watching it right now, so I will try to make sure to keep a note of any questions that you might have for us, and then we can address them either throughout the panel or at the end. So let's start off with like how everybody got into freelancing, because not everybody's journey is the same when it comes to starting off with freelance writing. So for instance, mine is I'm an educator by day, and I advocate very much for using role-playing games with students, both in the classroom for learning materials, but also outside of the classroom for extended learning purposes. And that kind of brought me into the world of writing and got me working on a couple of other projects before I got tapped to work for OnyxPath. So working on projects with them. So yeah, I did open calls and stuff like that throughout my years, and it was just a whole bunch of opportunities that opened up for me. So who would like to go with their journey and how they got into freelancing?
I vote Amy because she's right next to me.
Sure, Amy.
I was jumping in. So how it worked for me was I actually was at Gen Con a few years ago, and my boyfriend and I were there. And of course, I'm always excited to see the Vampire the Masquerade people. So I beelined for the White Wolf booth and was checking out everything and played through demos with them. And we actually took some time to really talk to a lot of them, had some really good, just casual conversation. And just kind of as an afterthought almost, my boyfriend kind of nudged me and was like, well, Amy's an artist. So I gave my business card to Martin Erickson, I think it was. And at that point, I'd been working on my art for a number of years. I guess maybe 7 or 8 years, I'd really been trying to take it seriously. So I had a decent amount of decent work to show. So a couple of months after that, I was contacted by OnyxPath to start on Chicago by Night. And it's just kind of progressed from there. It seems like when one job ends, there's another one there to pick up. So for me, it was kind of just being in the right place at the right time and being a little bit more prepared for it, for that moment that came. So maybe a little bit more unconventional, but yeah, that's how I got into it, and I love it so far. So yeah.
All right, Catie.
So I took a little bit of an unconventional way into freelancing, which is I was a journalist in New York City, got into LARP. And at the time, I was going to Dystopia Rising, and they were doing a series of game books. They were looking for writers, and they're like, "Hey, you write, right? You're a journalist. That's like the same thing, right?" I was like, "Not quite, but I'll give it a shot." And I started writing for that. So that's how I dipped my toes in the water with that. And then when OnyxPath, in particular with OnyxPath, partnered with the Dystopia Rising IP to write Dystopia Rising Evolution, I was chosen as one of the writers because I had done a lot of work beforehand. And I started writing with that. And then they're like, "Hey, are you interested in doing other IPs?" And I was like, "Yes, please sign me up." And after that, I did a bunch of other work elsewhere, and I've just been continuing since, and it's been a real pleasure so far.
Yes, Jose.
Yeah. So I came in way back in probably like too long ago. Time is rushing by in a way that I can't even process anymore. But it was years ago. I was a college sophomore, and I was writing wasn't a big thing. I've always written. I've always wanted to do writing, but I always thought it as a side thing. I wanted to work in psychology. I wanted to work in neurology. I wanted to do a kind of a STEM-ish science-y sort of person. But I got into gaming like when I started college, and I got really into World of Darkness, then New World of Darkness, now Chronicles of Darkness games. And one day I saw there was, I think it was the very first Onyx Path all call, and so I think to myself, what the heck? I'll pitch something in. I could do something like that. And so I threw in 1,000 words, and then one day out of the blue I get an email. It's like, "Hey, we need somebody to do a piece of fiction for the upcoming Promethean second edition anthology. Are you interested?" I'm like, "Okay." And I did that, and I went, "Oh, that was a fun experience." It's like, "Hey, Promethean second edition actually has an open spot for the core fiction. Are you interested in that?" And I'm like, "Okay." And I think to my back of myself, it wasn't until like my third or fourth like contract or gig where I thought to myself, "Oh, this is going to be a regular thing. I'm a freelancer now. Okay, I could lean into this." And yeah, and then from there, I get a job, I take it, I do it.
I love how they seem to snowball like that.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
From your first one, that it's just, all right, cool.
Yeah. So yeah, there are a couple of different ways to be able to get into freelancing that I think a lot of people don't really realize. And one of them is all calls, which like you definitely make sure to read the guidelines. That is really important, because what that tells us is that you can follow directions, but you also understand like how to follow directions as well. And one of the big things with the all calls is that you have to be willing to take a chance, right? And sometimes that is the hardest thing to do. But if you don't take a chance and you don't get your name out there, you may never get that chance to begin with. The other thing that I think other people don't really realize is that community content is also something that speaks very highly about for writers. Because as a developer, I know even with OnyxPath and the other games that I write on that aren't OnyxPath, I follow community content for those games and use that to look for writers who understand the system or understand how the writing process works or are willing to take a chance with mechanics and play around with that stuff. So what would your guys' biggest, like, if you're looking to get into freelancing and someone's looking for that first step, what would be the advice that you give them? Let's just keep going with Amy and we'll keep going around that way. It's just the easiest way to do that.
I guess, I mean, kind of going along with what you said just now about taking a chance, you know, you have to actually get out of that sort of imposter syndrome that we all kind of suffer from, you know, recognize that you are good enough, you know, and even if you reach out to an art director or, you know, any of the other writing resources, and they don't take you at that time, you know, you might be able to get some feedback, you know, and just, I guess another thing, just kind of be prepared. You know, for me, I had been working on my art for a number of years by the time I was in that situation. And actually, one kind of side note, I've been involved with a lot of different types of art over the years. And at one point I was going to school for practical makeup effects, like special effects. And one of the stories that the teachers kept telling us was about Greg Nicotero, who's this amazing artist who worked on Walking Dead and a lot of other things. And his main story was always be prepared, always have your portfolio. You never know when that moment is going to happen. And he happened to be vacationing in, I think it was Rome with his family, and happened to see George Romero, like eating on the side, like at a cafe or something. So this giddy young Greg Nicotero runs up and shows him his portfolio, and he started getting jobs right after that, you know? So just always working towards improving your portfolio and just being prepared for those unexpected moments, I think is kind of at least what helped me.
Catie?
I'm actually going to springboard off of Amy's point because it is a fabulous point. It's absolutely about taking those chances, at least when it comes to face-to-face interactions and socially, going to conventions, networking with people, and actually talking face-to-face with people. I know a wonderful friend by the name of Rachel Savicki, who is also in the freelance game, and she got almost all of her jobs by going to conventions and just networking the hell out of them. And she got, you know, jobs here and there, and keeping those jobs is another topic, but actually getting them, like putting yourself out there, is really important. By that same token, if you're not doing face-to-face interactions, I actually recommend you want to take, in some ways, less risks, just because you want to follow the guideline to the T. And the reason for it, there's a reason that a guideline is set out, because when you're a freelancer, you are meant to write to a certain format, a certain type, and that first submission that requires you to write to a certain format is basically a test for you guys to be like, are you going to follow guidelines if we actually hire you for a job? So if you just throw something out there that is not to guideline, it doesn't have what is asked for, is way over word count or way under word count, that proves to OnyxPath and other people that might hire you, oh, if you hire me, I'm not going to listen to what you say. I'm going to do whatever I want. So it's super important to follow guidelines. I mean, be creative, put yourself out there, put your writing out there. But if you're submitting someone to like an open call and there are submission guidelines, super important to follow them. That's pretty much it.
Yes, I definitely agree. And I will say that I actually hired Rachel for a project based on meeting her at Gen Con 2 years ago. So networking is definitely something that does help with getting positions and writing and stuff like that. All right, Jose?
Yeah. Since all my experiences tend to be like all calls, I'll build again. I'll also build up a little on what Katie said about following instructions. Like even even pay very close attention to like even the stuff that isn't about the content, but about how you send it. If they say if it's a specific Word file, if it's a specific email address, even those can be well. First of all, they might not be able to see you at all if they're like, hey, we want to see a Word file, and then you hand them like a PDF, and they can't, they're not ready for it. Yeah, I apologize. My internet's getting a little funky right now. But yeah. Other than that, what else would I? Follow directions. Also, always try to bring out your best work, and you're always bringing out your best work. Like don't get me wrong, but like when it comes to an all call, when it comes to putting yourself out there, don't necessarily think to yourself like, well, I'll just write something and I'll just send it off to them and see what they think. Like send something that like you're not like committed to, where it's like you'll work on this and you don't care what, or if you don't want to work on anything else, but send out something that like you care about a lot, to show the kind of passion you bring to something. Like one of my first all calls was like, hey, I know that like there's no update to this edition of this game yet, but here's a quick little 1,000 word thing of the mechanics I'd like to see in this. And none of that actually ever ended up in the game. But the first response I had was, hey, that game doesn't exist yet, and that game's not going to exist for a long while, 6 years. But you did a lot of really good writing there. I want to see what you work on this project. So yeah, so hopefully so that's what I mean is that if you're bringing something that follows to spec, and if you're bringing something where it's something you care about a whole awful lot, even if it's not directly connected to the project that you're really seeking, or that they actually have on call, your skill and your ability to follow directions and your confidence will shine through.
Yeah, and I think Jose, you brought up a really good point on the fact that as a freelancer, sometimes your ideas don't make it into the book, right? You may submit something and it may be some of their best work ever, and not one word of it will make it, or one sentence of it, I should say, will make it into the book that you would be asked to write on. And you really have to kind of understand that when you're freelancing for another company or big IP, you have to be within certain parameters. Licensing, all of that stuff is a big thing within the RPG community, and you kind of have to be familiar with that in order to understand how to write for something. You don't have to be like, intimately familiar, like a lawyer, but you should at least know like, okay, if a developer tells me no, there is a chain of reasoning as to why that might be. And one of them could be that the IP holder doesn't want you to do this. So with that being said, what are some of like the hardest things that you as a freelancer had to overcome when it came to taking that step? Like, I know for me, imposter syndrome is horrible. And I think and a lot of the industry does have it from time to time. So with that being something there, like for me, it's time management. I deal really well with a structure, which is why I'm a teacher during the day, because everything is structured for me. But when I have like all of this time and, you have 2 months to write so many words, all of that is nebulous and can be very difficult for me to be able to plan out. So that's one of the challenges that I have as a freelancer. So I like to talk about like some of the challenges that you might have as a freelancer when it comes to that stuff. So Amy?
Yeah. I think especially when you're starting out, I think one of the biggest challenges can be accepting every job that comes your way, because you feel like if you say no, or if you feel like you're starting to get overburdened, they're not going to come back to work with you again or something, so you just want to take on everything. And that is the fastest way to burn out. Just taking on way too much, or at least knowing how much you can handle is a really important thing. I know that I've had moments where I'm surprised I made it through, but, so yeah, just kind of understanding your limitations, I think is a good thing to keep in mind for your sanity anyway. And also, like what you said, time management, it gets really tricky. And it's funny how sometimes, one project is flowing perfectly. It just, your hand just glides across the tablet and everything just comes out great the very first time. Your sketch is perfect. Your colors are just working. And then you've got this glorious thing at the end. And then the next project, you're confident, you jump in, you're like, this is not working. This looks terrible. I'm a hack. Oh, they're going to find out, So it's being a freelancer, there's a lot of stresses, and it comes from a lot of different directions. So just like what you said, managing your time well is key. And also just doing things that help you de-stress at the end of it, because it's a very stressful thing sometimes. It's very rewarding as well. I don't want to scare anybody away, but that's one thing I think when I started out, I wasn't quite expecting the amount of stress that can come from it. So just taking care of yourself, understanding your limitations is super important. Yeah.
All right, Catie.
Can I say just ditto on what Amy said? But everything she said and more. But I also think I was, as she was speaking, I was like, oh gosh, it's everything I would have said. So great points.
Well, that's great that the artists and the writers have the same.
I know, exactly. It's very simple. Yeah, it's like it's the same.
Right.
The only other thing I was thinking, like, what else? And that is one of the biggest challenges I've run into is learning the worlds that I've been hired for, and learning them backwards and forwards. Because if you're writing for a world, you're creating materials for that world, and there is a history of information and stories surrounding whatever IP you're working for, whether it's Vampire or Scion or Scarred Lands or Dystopia Rising Evolution, or like any IP you work on has a history, has a story, has a genre. And knowing what that is and learning it and knowing it backwards and forwards and not being afraid to ask, hey, does this fit into the world or does this not? That has been the most challenging thing for me, just because it requires so much upfront time to read through all of the materials that came before, because I haven't necessarily played a lot of each. I've played some of it, but each game runner or story guide is going to present the material differently. And if you're going to write for it, you got to know it. So that's something else that you should always, be wary of, and also take the time to do when you accept the project, and make sure to allot enough time for that research period, plus the time it takes to either make the art or do the writing or do the development on a project.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
And I guess for art, it can translate like the art styles, each
Yeah.
of their properties has a very distinctive art style. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Something I wouldn't have thought of. Yeah.
Yeah. Takes a little bit of homework to get started.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Jose.
Yeah. There's actually two challenges that I had to deal with when I was studying out. The first and the most important one is to I'm just trying to find like a nice way to say it, because it can sound pretty harsh, but you've got to learn. I had to learn to like not take it personally whenever I got an editor's note or a red line where somebody says something like, "Hey, this needs to be changed. Hey, I don't understand what this sentence is. Hey, I need you. Hey, I actually this isn't to tie a little bit back to what Katie said. Hey, actually, this isn't how the setting works. Here, take a look at this, and this, and see what you say, and try to come back to you with that. Because when I say that, a lot of people tend to think like, well, no, of course I don't have an ego. I've never. But the thing is that like when you're freelancing, you're all by yourself most of the time. It's kind of a solitary job, especially in projects like these where you're basically working remote, even before that became the thing. So you spend a lot of time with your job. You spend a lot of time thinking about it. You spend a lot of time putting it all together. So when you send it off and you get it back, you'll tend to see things where like, oh, I hope the editor didn't notice that one. Guess what? They noticed. Or like, oh, why didn't I think about that? Oh, I see this typo here and they caught it. And don't take it personally. Everybody has writer's tips. Everybody has stuff that they don't know about a setting. Everybody has like some difficulties in some form or another with the craft, and I think that goes for art too. Everybody's got something, and somebody, and your editor, your developer, will notice that, and that's good because it's a collaborative effort. You are trying to make this better. You are trying to make this so that when somebody buys your work, they can read your work and go, "Wow, this is dynamite," instead of like, how come they didn't know angels didn't work like this? Because if your developer will know and find out, the reader certainly will as well. So again, like, it's just something that happens. You just make that second draft edit, and that leads me into my second important thing that I had to learn. That also ties back into burnout, as Amy was talking about. You have to be open and communicate with your client, your developer, because stuff is going to happen in your life that you may not expect. You may take on a project and you cleared your schedule out for it. You're set well to go, but then there's a death in the family. Or in my case, because I was in Florida, hey, there's a Category 5 hurricane down your way, and you have to board up everything and stock up on gas. Also, you're not going to be working for like a week. Stuff like that, it's really, really, really important to send something off to your client, to your developer, and just be like, hey, listen, I'm gonna need that extension, or or something has happened, or even if it comes to it, I can't work on this anymore. I'm more than willing to work with you on a future project, but something's come up, and let them know early. Let's always let them know early, because hopefully you'll be lucky and you'll be on a project with a pretty open schedule, but sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're on a really, really, really thin time window, and it's projects like that where it's absolutely critical to be talking to your clients, and also with your other collaborators if you're on a project like that. Everybody needs to be in the know. So open communication is another thing, and that's hard for me because, as some people may have noticed by how I'm acting on the video call, I'm an anxious person. I'm a super anxious person. I get very stiff, and I always think a lot, and I always overthink. So sometimes I'm like, oh no, if I send that I can't work on this, will they ever hire me again? And the answer is usually, yeah, they will, because they hired you in the first place because they like your work. And most of the time, stuff like that isn't even your fault. Stuff happens. You know, time gets squashed all the time. So yeah, to sum it up, you know, just don't take criticism personally. This is a collaborative effort. Never be afraid to reach out to people, especially your clients.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as a developer, I definitely like I've done both sides of the coin where I've done freelance work and I've done development work. And even after going through all the development work, when I get feedback from another developer, I'm like, oh my gosh, they hate me. You know, I go through the whole cycle of self-loathing because I feel like I'm not enough, or I feel like I'm a fraud, or whatever the case may be, where whatever my imposter syndrome decides to hit that button. And I've had to flip my thinking when it comes to developers, because developers in overall, and I do see the question, we'll get to that in a second. I think developers overall kind of get, like, nobody really knows exactly what they do sometimes. I know I definitely didn't when I first started freelance writing, and then I started developing. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much that we have to do. But developers are actually one of the people that have the big picture going on, whereas writers will have generally a smaller picture, and artists and everything like that. And the developer is the person that needs to make sure that the voices all match, so it doesn't sound chaotic when you put a book out. And that's kind of like how I flipped it, as to the, oh, well, what I wrote just isn't matching up with everything else. So I need to fix that so that my work doesn't stand out as being wrong or weird or off when it comes to the bigger picture. Because people will pick up on that. I mean, you know, they can pick up on, there's a comma missing in a sentence, you know, a random sentence in the middle of the book that's been printed 2 years ago that nobody caught. So they can definitely pick up when voices just don't work right with the rest of, they may not understand what it means or what they're seeing, but it sounds or feels different. So I think flipping that mentality with developers is helpful, like even as a developer. Okay, and so we had a question from the Twitch chat from, I'm really hoping to pronounce this right, Enefael. If I did not pronounce that right, I apologize. But if you apply to a place and they come back to you saying it's not there yet, but keep working, how long do you leave before, or how long of a space do you leave before applying again? So, Catie?
It sounds like they kind of liked the direction you were going, but your work wasn't quite there yet. Honestly, drop that piece of work, put it away for a month, and don't look at it. Don't read it over. Don't look at it at all. And the reason for that is because when you're working on something, you don't see the mistakes you're making. You don't see the fallacies of it. So just literally put away a document for a month, work on something else, work on something fresh, something new if you need something creative in the interim. After that month, go back to it, read it over again, and if you've been doing other work in the meantime, see how you can improve it and see if you can change it in such a way that it fits whatever they're looking for a little bit more. And and then, like, you know, after that, feel free to reapply. But I think it's not so much time period when you reapply, so much as take the time you need to actually improve whatever it was you were working on.
Yeah. Does anyone have anything to add to that?
Sure, I can add like an artist perspective, maybe. You know, if you try to apply to something and they said the same thing, like what Catie said, you know, they must like your style, but maybe along those same lines, maybe set that aside and just try something new for a while. Maybe you can learn a different technique, or, you know, do some old master's studies of old paintings, or, you know, maybe movie stills or something that's totally different than what you were doing before. And I guarantee you're going to start picking up some new techniques and new ways of seeing things that you can then bring back into your style. Just maybe giving yourself a new perspective. And especially those old master's studies, you can learn so much from the people who have done an amazing job already, kind of studying their brush strokes or their use of color and, you know, stuff like that. You can always learn from them.
I think that another way you can look at it, if you are still looking at it in terms of like a time frame, if you're interested in a client that has like a client that has like different periods of time for all calls or open calls as opposed to a client with a continuous all call, try to use that time in between the all calls. Like if they open up submissions in spring and you get something back where it's like, hey, we like this, but it's not quite there, send it back in. That's your opportunity, because now you have, like, if they reopen in like in fall or even that next year, that's more than enough time. That's plenty of time to either shelve it or work on something new, or as y'all were saying earlier, just look back to the masters, look back to stuff you like, and try to come back with a new fresh perspective on what you got, and then resubmit. Otherwise, in terms of like a hard like suggested time frame, like at least like a month or two, especially for like if a client has a continuous open call, if they're just always open, like give it like a month, maybe 2 or 3 months max, and then try again.
Sure, because you don't want them to forget who you are too. keep yourself fresh in their minds.
I absolutely agree with that. I think currently we're waiting for Crystal to come back, but while we are, does anybody else on the Twitch chat have any questions for us? Otherwise, I can kind of segue to the next topic until she comes back. So in that case, how about we talk about different types of freelancing? I mean, there are several different types. There's development, there is being an artist, there is story and plot writing, there's mechanical writing, especially in games, and there's even world building and development. So my question for you guys on this panel is, what experiences do you personally have with those particular types of freelancing? And what advice would you give people who are in that particular type of freelancing?
I think I'll defer to Jose.
Okay. Okay. I mean, we can swirl back to you for, being an artist is a unique perspective. And I assume cover art is different from, interior art and that sort of thing as well. So.
I guess. Oh, so you know what? I'm going to let Jose go.
Okay.
I really only had like 2 focuses in my freelancing time, and they kind of intermingle, but I have worked in pure fiction, and I have worked in design. I have worked in like partially design, partially just actual rules writing, and that is actually 2 very, very different disciplines, because when you're writing fiction, you're obviously writing with the storytelling in mind. You're looking at evocative visuals. You're also looking at an economy of words, and that's similar for all writing in general, but it's a very different economy of words. For when you're writing fiction, especially in gaming, you got to keep it tight. You got to keep it really, really tight, and you got to get straight to the point, because most of the time you're not going to be writing these big, sprawling short stories as much as you like to. You're probably writing like 1,000 words of prose before it's chapter, or maybe like 2,000 words for an anthology. I think the longest piece of fiction I've ever written in a freelance sense is probably in the Beast anthology, and that was like a 7.5K piece. And even then, that's still short of a novella. That's just basically a kind of a long story. For design and for rules writing, that is different in the fact that while you may have a bigger word count if you have that on your project, this is where you got to start thinking about technical writing. And this is something that a lot of people who want to get into writing for RPGs in general, this is something they may not have a lot of experience for. I know I didn't have a lot of experience with technical writing. I learned a little bit of it in high school, but I didn't really get the chance to apply or develop it until I started freelancing. And even then, I feel like I have a lot to learn concerning that. And I think that's kind of the more important discipline to get into, the design and rule writing. If you're freelancing and you're a writer, most of the time you are going to be doing that. You will probably be writing, you might end up writing with like, and you have the chapter where you work on the rules that show up in every version of this game line.
Yeah.
And you can't copy because that's plagiarism. You have to write this in your own way while still communicating the rules. So yeah, my advice
oh, go ahead. Continue.
Okay. And my advice would definitely be to, if you end up in that kind of discipline, and again, you probably will, especially if you're hired onto a client like OnyxPath, pick up a book, pick up an introduction to technical writing, doing what you can for free on the internet. If you could take a class for it, cool. If you maybe have like a little bit of a minor in technical writing in college or something, and you think to yourself, well, I don't know, I don't know about writing for RPGs. I don't know if I'm much of a storyteller. I don't really know how to write a lot of fiction prose. Don't worry about it. In fact, you have the ultimate secret weapon. You know how to write a sentence that clearly communicates things. And for rules, that is key. Another important issue with design is that this is another thing tying back to a challenge. Collaboration is important. You can't just make up a rule and then throw it in a draft unless you are very, very lucky and expect to get away with it. I think I've only done this like maybe once, and I didn't even realize I was doing it until I saw a note from a developer who was like, "Oh, I never thought about that. That's really cool." And I went, "Oh, I should have brought this up in the email chain. Oh boy." That's the other thing. You might have a communication system set up on a project. Hopefully you do. Hopefully it's not just you and the void. So some clients will just leave you in the void and then stitch it up later. That's not the case for OnyxPath, but that is for others. For some others. But usually you might end up in like an email chain or a Discord server or a Slack channel. And there, when you're designing, that's when you need to throw out your ideas, and that's when you need to talk to people. And again, this is where you might need to take criticism, where you're like, "Oh man, I have this really cool idea," and somebody might go, "Actually, I don't think that's a good idea because I run the math on this."
Yeah.
You need to take that into account. You need to listen, because everybody on that team has the same experiences as you. They are just as important to the project as you are. And you are, again, I keep coming back to this, but this is a collaborative work, and you are all coming together to make the best product possible.
And I'm going to springboard off of that, Jose, and add that it's collaboration is extremely important, and understanding that you are not the only person in the situation, and understanding that you're basically just one of many writers working to a common goal is so important to understand, and understand that your ego needs to, in some ways, be taken out of it, because while we're all working towards a common goal, which is the production of this book or this art piece or whatever it happens to be, your input is in some ways no more important than the other person's input Realistically, it's up to the developer to determine which input winds up there at the end. With that said, I'm going to hand things back over to Crystal. Everyone give a round of applause for Crystal
Yay.
returning, and let's damn her computer.
I mean, if anyone wants to know what the physical embodiment of my imposter syndrome was, it was that right there.
No, you've been an awesome moderator. I've thrown it out there, so I'm glad you're back.
But you're back. You made it through.
Yeah.
I did. All right. So where were you guys? Where'd you guys leave off?
We were actually going through different types of freelancing, and kind of giving our own little tidbits on that. But we can hop to literally any subject, and I see a question from Flames Rising. So
Yeah. So and this question's for Amy. Specifically, which is, what do you think of selling stock art on DriveThruRPG?
Of anybody doing that or me?
It just says, what do you think of? So I'd say both.
So yeah, to be honest, I don't really have a lot of experience with that sort of thing. I'm assuming that is like the community content or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I haven't done that myself, but I think that's a fantastic idea, because not only could you potentially make a little bit of money from it, but your art is being seen. It's being seen by the community. It's being potentially seen by people like Crystal, who looks at that sort of stuff. So I say wherever you can put up your art, do it, definitely.
All right. And then another question is, what are the benefits of doing freelance work as opposed to self-publishing? So Catie, you want to weigh in on that? I have thoughts too, and I'll wait until everyone's all done.
The biggest thing is the support that you do not get when you self-publish. When you freelance, you're usually doing it with an established company that has art resources, that has the capital to be able to produce a book in a in that looks presentable, has the resources to hire editors, to hire art directors, to basically put everything together. If you self-publish, you kind of have to scrabble and find those things on your own, and it's a lot harder. It takes a lot more resources, takes a lot more money for you to do so. Will the gains outweigh how much you put into it at the end? That's kind of dicey. It really depends on the quality of the book. You could pour your heart and soul into a book and then it doesn't sell, and then you're left with, you spent X amount of money and you get nothing out of it. So I think that's in some ways the main pros and cons from my opinion, my perspective, but I'd love to hear everybody else's as well.
Yeah. So I think from a legal standpoint, when you are freelancing for someone else, especially for like a bigger IP, you get to play around in that setting. Whereas if you're doing self-publishing, you will have to create those either from open licensed games or from things such as you create them on your own, which can be also extremely daunting if you've not gone through the process of being a freelancer or working in that space. One of the things you could also do is, again, community content. So things like Storytellers Vault, Canis Minor, Solarian Vault, what others are there? Story Path Nexus. Are all things that you guys can go to kind of play around with that, where you're playing with an IP, but you're still kind of technically self-publishing, but there are still supports there. They still have templates there for you. They still have art that you can use that is licensed and legal for you to be able to do that. And you can practice doing those things in an environment that is supported. So there's like a medium in between there with community content that was not there before in the, what is that? How long has community content been around? 5-6 years, something like that. So, community content is definitely a good way to kind of play around with that whole, you want to self-publish, but you're not quite ready to take that full leap. It's a good happy medium.
Those are such good points. And it translates perfectly to the art aspect also. You know, you can paint vampires, but you can't tie it into World of Darkness if you're doing that on your own. And the support system is unmatched. I mean, I can't imagine trying to become the next Loish or something, you know, like it feels like it's 1 in a million chance to really become self-sufficient as an independent artist. Just a very difficult thing to do. So being able to be part of that community, or I guess, for lack of a better term, the cog in the machine, you know, working for a company, you know, it just the support is there.
Yeah. Okay. So we have like 5-ish minutes. So what I'd like to go around and do really quickly is for you guys to give one piece of advice for somebody who is like looking to freelance, or might just be getting started, or is in freelancing and is kind of confused as to where to go from here. So any of those, if you want to do something like that, then we can go around with social media and stuff real quick. So, all right. So Amy?
Sure. Yeah, just make yourself known. Go to conventions. They're hopefully opening back up now. An invaluable resource of networking. Talking to other artists, ask how their journeys were. You know, my favorite part of Gen Con was Artist Alley. Just kind of like skulk around and talk to the different artists, and you know, you can learn a lot from them, even if they have a few minutes to look at your portfolio, give you some pointers. I actually did that a couple of times before I got into it with OnyxPath. So other than that, just keep working on your craft, whatever it is, whether it's writing or art or whatever. You know, and the open calls, the community. Yeah, so just submit your stuff, even if it's not with an actual company yet. The community is very supportive. So use your resources. There's a lot of really good ones.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Catie?
I'm going to give some advice that I wish someone had given back to me when I was first starting out as just a general writer. And that is kill your ego. And if you think you've killed your ego, kill it again. You will never continue to get jobs. You will never continue to get work unless you understand that the feedback you're getting is valuable feedback, because that feedback is from the people that want to hire you, that will pay you money to do work. But if you don't take the feedback, if you think, oh, I know better, you're not going to get hired again. You're not going to progress anywhere. So listen to feedback. That's how you grow, and that's how you learn. And it's so important. And deadlines. Always meet your deadline. And that's it.
Jose?
Yeah, I don't also like that. Always try to meet your deadline. And if you can't meet your deadline, ask for an extension. More than likely or not, the answer will be yes, and your life will be a lot easier. But other than that, the one thing I wish what I would tell somebody is that it's gonna be okay. Which seems a little generic until you realize sometimes you run into little crisis stuff in freelancing. Freelancing is feast and famine. Sometimes you'll run into like dry spots where it's not an issue with you that you're not getting any work. It's just that maybe your chosen field there's nothing really open right now, or there's everybody working on something, especially if you're working in something with a kind of a niche market or tabletop role playing game. So, you know, just keep to it, stick to it. It's gonna be okay. Like you will, like if you do your hard work, you turn in on time, you keep your open communication, you're gonna get projects because people are gonna like you and they're gonna like your work, And there's also, you might even get fans who want to see more of your work specifically. Something can happen. And it's amazing every time. So yeah, it's going to be okay. Keep at it and take care of yourself.
100%.
Yes. And I think my piece of advice is going to be that other writers are not your enemy. Like, we are all working together on the same goals, and you should also be celebrating other people's work. You may not have written on a project, or you may be very jealous that somebody got chosen for a project. Those are valid feelings, but you should also be supporting and celebrating their achievements as well, because as a community, we're very small. We are a very, very, very small community, and it is growing, but it's growing in a way that is not noticeable to a lot of people. And I think that supporting other writers and stuff like that not only is helpful for the community and large, but also shows that you are willing to be a cheerleader for others, and that you aren't a cutthroat person or, out to topple everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, because that can be the most detrimental thing for you. So,
Yep.
Okay.
Everybody's at a different stage in their journey. So
yeah. All right. Very, very quickly, social media, and then I will plug what's last with everything for Onyx Path. So Amy, real quick.
Yep. Instagram, Amy Wilkins Art, same at ArtStation. And I also have my website, amywilkinsart.com.
Catie?
All right, you can find me on Twitter at @CTheGriffin. You can find me on Facebook, Catie Griffin Writer. And then you can also find my website, www.mostimprobable.com. And that's where you can contact me with the fun little contact us button.
Awesome. Jose?
Not a whole lot of social media at the moment. I'm mostly on Twitter at alouderplace. And yeah, that's where you can see occasional updates from me, and maybe even pictures of my cat, when the sun and the moon align. So yeah.
Awesome. And I'm on social media. You can find me everywhere at Body and Soul 152, and you can also go to my website, which is thegeekypanda.com. So thank you guys for joining us for Freelancing 101. Remember that OnyxPathCon is actually a fundraiser for the Bodhana Group, which is a very awesome non-for-profit group that uses role-playing games for therapy and mental health support. So please make sure that you are donating, or you are also sharing links and stuff like that for others to donate. And all of the games that are being run at OnyxPathCon for payment are also part of those donations. So please make sure you are helping to support a really, really awesome cause. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of the day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.